You're watching TechShark, bite-sized tech stories for conservatives surfing the net. Today we have an exclusive interview with Breitbart senior technology correspondent Allum Bokhari, author of the recently released Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. Now this book is a must-read for those looking to understand how big tech companies have radically reshaped our country and may alter the future of our civilization's history. So Allum, I've read your work for a while, but for those viewing you who don't know you as well, tell us a bit about yourself.
So I've been covering technology for Breitbart News since 2015, before Tech Censorship was on many people's radar. And before that, I lived in London, and I live in Washington, D.C. But yeah, the tech censorship issue has grown to such an extent over the past 4 or 5 years that I feel it was necessary to write this book, especially because I had so many Silicon Valley whistleblowers who had a lot of interesting information, I think, that the American people need to know about.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. All right, so when you were writing this up until very recently, I imagine, how do you feel about the recent developments with censorship regarding the New York Post?
Well, I mean, the title of the book is Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. And I think, when I first thought up the title, some people would say, well, that's an alarmist title. Maybe even 4 or 2 months ago, people would still say that's an alarmist title. But can you really say that after the events of the past 2 weeks? The tech companies not just censoring the New York Post, one of America's oldest newspapers, but also censoring the White House press secretary, and also going around their own protocols to do it. Facebook was actually condemned by the Poynter Institute, which accredits all their liberal-leaning fact-checkers, for going around them. Twitter as well admitted that they didn't get it right, that this wasn't hacked material that the New York Post published. So it's obvious that they reacted so quickly because they saw it was a bombshell story and they saw it would hurt Biden. So it's very obvious what they're doing. And all the terms they've invented over the past 4 years and implemented on their platform, whether it's misinformation or fake news or election interference, that wasn't enough to give them the excuse they needed to censor this New York Post story. So it they kind of took their mask off and revealed what their true agenda was.
Most definitely. So also in recent developments, I feel like we've got a new news cycle every 2 to 3 days, and so yesterday we just had a massive hearing. What was your take? Was that political theater? Was that a massive game changer? What's your take on what happened yesterday?
Well, these hearings, there have been so many of these hearings with big tech CEOs, and they are mostly political theater. Obviously, there are a few people in Congress and in the Senate who know their stuff on the issue. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Marsha Blackburn, Paul Gosar, to name a few. On the other side, Tulsi Gabbard. But there's no majority in Congress or the Senate to rein in these tech giants. I doubt there will be in the foreseeable future. Most Democrats support big tech censorship. They want more of it. If you paid attention to their questions during the Commerce Committee, some were asking, well, why isn't Facebook taking down misinformation more quickly?
Right.
Why aren't they taking down hate speech more quickly? So that's the attitude of the Democrats. On the Republican side, well, many senators, many congressmen take money from the big tech giants. There's a whole chapter in Deleted on how big tech has become the biggest lobbying spenders in Washington, funding both sides of the aisle. So you just won't see any action from Congress besides these hearings, which are good political theater. They embarrass the tech CEOs, but they don't really do anything. They don't change the law. The only arm of the government taking meaningful action on this issue right now, I think, is the executive branch under Donald Trump. And of course, if Joe Biden gets in next week, that'll all change and he'll start using the federal government to push for more censorship.
Right, most definitely. It's crazy how it's first there were the platforms themselves, and so then conservatives created their own platforms. And then when they created their own platforms, then it was the payment processors that undermined them. And then when, I'm sure they'll try to take down conservative payment processors, and then it's it seems the only solution is some kind of government regulation of some kind. That seems to be the only thing that many of these big tech companies really fear, is some kind of government regulation. Yeah, and I do remember a major theme of your book is you talk about this term conservative ink for a lot of people who are more or less paid off. Now, what do you think it is? Do you think a lot of these people, do you think most of the people are kind of naive about the implications of big tech censorship, thinking that the free market will fix it? Or do you think a lot of them are purely just being bought out? What do you think is going on here?
I think it's a mix of things. I think the majority of establishment conservatives don't take the issue of tech censorship seriously, partly because these are the guys who, they go on cable news, they go on big radio shows. It doesn't really affect them. They'll always have a platform. Meanwhile, the people getting censored are their ideological competitors, the same people who sort of ran them out of the Republican Party in 2016, defeated all their favorite candidates in the primary by supporting Donald Trump. So I don't think they're too sad to see these, populist right-wingers get banned on these platforms. For the most part, there are some who are consistent. There are some who support free speech. But again, I'm not sure if it's at the top of their agenda. And of course, the other thing you have to understand is, big donor networks like the Koch network, they're in bed with big tech. They're doing everything they can to prevent reform that would rein in the censorship. And most of the establishment conservative think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, Competitive Enterprise Institute, American Enterprise Institute, all these institutions take money from big tech. They defend big tech. And you mentioned, government regulation. They've kind of created this myth that if you interfere with big tech special legal privileges, which were given to them by the government in the 1990s, and which no other industry, no other type of company enjoys, then you're somehow meddling in the free market. No, you're not. You're meddling in a law that the government passed, that the government gave these tech companies in the 1990s. It's a special government handout.
Exactly. So on the other hand, so you've mentioned a few of the politicians, whether Democrat or Republican, who actually more or less have the right idea on these issues, whether Trump wins or loses. I've heard some talk about a Trump appointee named Nathan Symington, who many in politics are excited about. Have you heard about him at all?
Yeah, so the biggest positive we've seen in the past year is that the Trump administration is making the right moves. They're making the right appointments. They're really getting their hands around the personnel issue, which was such a problem in the early years of the administration. We're seeing it, today with Miles Taylor, so many leakers and anti-Trump operatives in the bureaucracy. But especially in the past year, since John McEntee came into the PPO, they've been making the right appointments. So one appointment is, for example, is Adam Kandayeb at the NTIA. He drafted the petition to the FCC that allowed Ajit Pai to come out and say, well, yes, we're going to look at rulemaking changes to Section 230, which is that critical law that allows the tech companies to censor almost anyone they like. And Adam Kandayeb, by the way, he's a free speech lawyer, a free speech expert. He's actually fought free speech cases against Twitter in the past, so he was an excellent appointment. The other person, as you mentioned, is Nathan Symington, who has been nominated by Trump to the FCC to replace the old establishment-favored Republican commissioner. So if he gets through, there will be a majority on the FCC, 3 Republicans, who I think will be in favor of reining in the tech giants. That's huge. I mean, when you consider the fact that Congress and the Senate won't really do anything, the fact that we might have an FCC willing to do something is going to be a major step in the right direction.
Most definitely. So oftentimes whenever I talk about big tech issues, specifically from like Facebook or Twitter and many other places like that, I often see a lot of commenters sort of doing this flex, sort of being proud of the fact that they don't use social media or that they're more or less giving up the fight. What would you say to those people who more or less are saying, well, the mainstream platforms aren't allowing us, we're proud of the fact that we're not on there anymore? What would you say to them?
Well, from a political standpoint, what you're doing is you're self-censoring. You're doing what they want you to do, because what these tech platforms are trying to do, they don't care about conservatives or kicking conservatives off their platform. They care about, all the people on their platforms who are undecided. That's why they're working so hard to control information, control what information reaches non-conservatives on the platform. Imagine an undecided voter trying to find out more information about Biden and Trump on Google. All they're going to find is endless propaganda from the mainstream corporate media favoring Biden, covering up Biden's scandals, and attacking Trump. We've published material at Breitbart News, analysis showing they've cut visibility to Breitbart links by over 99% compared to 2016. So you just will not see conservative links in most political Google searches. Maybe you'll see 1 or 2 Fox News links, but that'll be it. Mm-hmm. So, taking yourself off the platforms, you're just making it easier for the tech giants to deny a wide range of viewpoints to those crucial undecided voters. It's a good thing to have accounts on Parler and Gab, and BitChute and all these other platforms and to use them and to use alternative search engines as well. You should definitely do that. But especially in an election year, I think everyone needs to be on the main platforms as well, regardless of how biased they are.
All right, so if I'm getting this correctly, it sounds like the best approach for the conservative movement really is a two-pronged approach to where, on one hand, we're not surrendering on the mainstream platforms, because that's where conservatives recruit other people to their own point of view. You often see so many people who say, I was a liberal, I was a far leftist, until I saw these ideas or until I started to get concerned about free speech. I mean, I would say one of the major stories of the 2010s is how many people, whether it was like Occupy people or video gamers or people in the skeptics community or whatever, a lot of those kind of shifted over to the conservative side of things and brought a lot of their online hacktivist tactics with them. And now we're so good at blasting people online, on debating, on really undermining a bunch of these ideas, that they are now terrified. Is that more or less the impression? And so then on the other hand, so while it's good to stay in the mainstream platforms, on the other hand, we also want to make sure that conservatives have a home base where they know that they can spread ideas amongst themselves and debate these things and kind of like have a safe home base. Is that more or less the two-pronged approach you're in favor of?
Well, I'd say it's a three-pronged approach. Those two things, and also pressure representatives to take action. Primary politicians who don't take the issue seriously, and of course vote in the coming election, because I don't think this issue gets fixed without the federal government on board.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So if you knew that a major politician, judiciary member, or some other major conservative speaker, or some mover or shaker in all of politics was watching this video right now, what is the number one thing that you'd say to them about what they need to do in order to make this entire situation better?
There's a very simple end game. The tech giants, of course, are not being honest. They claim they have to filter. If you saw Mark Zuckerberg's opening statement at the committee yesterday, he said, "Well, if you interfere with our right to filter, then the internet will be flooded with harassment." They want to scare politicians. They want to scare the public by implying that if you don't protect their right to censor everyone, then the internet will just become a mess of obscenity and harassment and all sorts of other family unfriendly things. Not true at all. Look at what Google does with obscenity. They give users a safe search filter, a button that you can turn on or off. Twitter does the same thing. If you want to filter obscenity out of your feed, you just have to press a button in your settings. Why don't they do the same thing with their filters on fake news, on misinformation, on hate speech? Also legal, constitutionally protected speech, but you can't opt out of the filters. So the end game is, if tech companies want their legal privileges, they have to prove that every single one of their users opted in to their filters on constitutionally protected legal speech. That should be the test of being a platform. That will end the censorship. And we know they have the technology to do it because they've done it with obscenity. They just don't want to do it with fake news and misinformation and all their other made-up political terms, because they value controlling the flow of news and controlling the flow of political information so much right now.
That's very true. And I would definitely say that the bread and butter of what's going on in just our politics and our daily news, just in the entire Western world right now, is more or less gaslighting. That's like the big term that like everybody's really starting to learn. It's about the left, the main political establishment, they're doing certain things, and when you actually call them out on it, or you call them out on the double standards, they pretend that those don't exist. I know that with, say, the whole concern about biased algorithms. Now, of course, I'm not quoting directly, I'm paraphrasing her, but remember AOC gave this whole speech about when algorithms are made by certain people who have certain biases, they then are coding those biases into the algorithms, which then control how those platforms work. But if you as a conservative bring up the whole idea of biased algorithms, people on the left will say, how can an algorithm be biased? It's an AI, it's got no stake in all this. Whereas in truth, it's all a matter of what the AI is taught. I mean, as somebody explained it, or rather as I read it somewhere, it was basically like, if you code an algorithm to recognize every person with long hair and say, okay, that's a lady, and then it sees a person with short hair, will say, okay, that's a dude. Or it's if like you code it to say, okay, some conservative phrase is hate speech, then that algorithm will automatically begin finding anybody who says that word and say, that's hate speech. And the left right now really does what I can only describe as a sort of like censorship laundering thing, to where like it seems like these major organizations like the ADL or the SPLC, they'll say something is hateful, and then all of a sudden all these organizations have a green light to crack down on this or that and say, okay, this is good reason enough to take people off of your platform. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Precisely, and this is why I'd encourage people to read the book. You can find it at deletedbook.com, because it really gets under the surface of how those algorithms work. And it's not just my opinions on how they work, it's the opinions of people inside Facebook, inside Google, inside Twitter, the few remaining conservatives in the industry who break down how it all works. I'll give you a brief overview. It's two things they're using. They're using something called language analysis, which is what you described, training algorithms to identify certain types of speech as hate speech. And of course, we don't know how they're being trained because they don't show us what data the algorithms are being trained on. But you can probably surmise that part of the data is what's provided to them by their advisors, the SPLC, the ADL, all these organizations you mentioned, because they're official advisors to these Silicon Valley companies on the specific issue of hate speech. The second tool they use is something called network analysis. Network analysis looks at connections. It doesn't look at content, but looks at who's following who's sharing links to what website. And that's really a formula for banning not just one or two people, but entire political movements, suppressing entire political movements. So say if one big conservative gets banned with, 100,000 followers, his followers may not get banned, but when it sends a message to the algorithm saying that all those followers, all those 100,000 people, they were following an account that was banned for hate speech or conspiracy theories or whatever else. So while they may not be banned, they'll probably have their volume turned down in the algorithm. They'll appear less at the top of your feed, or they'll appear less in search results. So that's the technology that Silicon Valley uses. Every single platform uses it. And it's, as I said, a formula for suppressing entire political movements almost invisibly. You can't see it's happening. And this is why these platforms are so dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that with Facebook, it's like I'll be scrolling through, that whole flashbook thing they say, you posted this meme 2 or 3 years ago, and it's like, I scroll through now, and I just see thing after thing of this page is no longer available, and I don't even know what pages have been taken down or censored because they're just gone. There's no record of them. And that's something which I just feel like, it feels like watching Game of Thrones when it's like all your favorite characters are dead, and so much of it's like, why even be here anymore? But we do have to keep up the good fight. So, all right, so everybody, please do check out Deleted, Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election by Allum Bokhari. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope to hear from you again sometime soon.
Thank you. Great to be on.
Thanks. Thanks for watching TechShark. Once again, I'm Alexander Hall with MRC-TV and Newsbusters Tech Watch. Have a good week.